in no more than 2.5 hours. Regroup at rally point 427 and jump as a group. I don't want any stragglers. We do this right, and everyone gets some well-deserved surely. Parting to attend to their own fleet, the commander left the admiral alone at her command display. This may not have been a battle with clashing blades which bards sing might songs of, but to the people that she saved it was a mighty victory, though she certainly did feel for these people, and would have normally been happy to extend her reasonable services to most anyone for the right price. This was different. The Kayamayak, though fairly well known and liked among the GCC, were not especially wealthy, nor did they carry the favor that was usually needed to get a fleet like hers to show up somewhere. If it wasn't for her bullheaded Anishinaabe partner, the partner many of her sisters had often tried to deride her for keeping, she wouldn't even be here at all. But now that she was glad to have saved so many innocent lives, even if there wasn't any profit to be made. Ew. The hiss of air filling a vacuum was immediately audible inside of Sarah's helmet as that Mick's more serious tone popped into the earpiece in her helmet. If ya didn't, I'll even let you sit in the co-pilot's seat while we make history. What the fuck are ya on about now, huh? Seeing the green lights around the airlock door switch from yellow to green, she flicked the latches on her helmet and pulled it off her head. Her previously compacted red mane of curls unfurled itself in strange directions as it escaped from the confines of the helmet into zero gravity. Without any sort of weight hindering it, the mass of red hair had become an amorphous blob. She tried to shake out the mess to tame it, which only resulted in an even more disjointed shape. As she clips her helmet into its harness on her thigh, she grabs onto the netting that covers all four walls of the airlock to steady and orient herself properly towards the door. Right when she gets her bearings, the door begins to slide open, and she is greeted by a plethora of odors, some pleasant and some skunky, as the door finally swung open to reveal the interior of a rather sparse docking and airlock. The middle of the path forward, and just over a meter from the door. His large magnetic boots anchored him to the floor, and the bulky, weighted Martian standard red clothing did much to hide his wide frame. In his mouth sat a tobacco rolled around something far smellier. Between the hand-rolled stoge in his mouth, the massive revolver in a low hip holster, and the thin lines of black carbon fiber weaved around his left eye. It was obvious that he was going for a specific aesthetic. Sarah even thought he looked quite a bit more rugged now with those scars and that full beard, with his hands resting on his hips just so. Even if one was dangerously close to a hand cannon, he definitely had a certain presence she wasn't expecting. For just a moment, she almost felt the same way she did 8 years ago. However, before she could continue that thought, Mick finally spoke up. "All right," I scanned. "Yeah, and it don't look like you're trying nothing, so I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I'll tell ya exactly what's going on once we're on the bridge and strapped in. I already set in the sequence into the computer, so we got about..." Mick's left eye slightly twitches, and he glances off for a second, about 6-7 minutes. "Throw on them boots and follow me." Mick's left arm made a slight mechanical sound as he used it to point towards a pair of magnetic boots attached to the wall next to the door. "Yeah. No smoking on a station is illegal, right? Especially that shit you're fucking humming over there." Sarah spoke as she reoriented herself and pushed towards where the boots were mounted. Even though she was at his mercy, she couldn't help but make the obvious quip in the situation. Fuck the police! Sic semper tyrannis. Mick took a long drag and slowly let out the smoke. We're free out here, remember? Out here, especially when you're by your lonesome like I've been for the past 6 months. The only living being that can hold you to account is you. It's important to reflect on that idea because it applies everywhere, even the densest, most populated cities. Is that really what you're doing out here? Just getting high, building weird shit, and philosophizing? Sarah retorted. Yup. Mick responded with a hearty chuckle. Well, that and... He trails off as he takes another drag of his stogie. After allowing the trail of smoke lingering in air for just a moment, he continued, It's surprisingly freeing not to have to worry about blowing up a whole bunch of people just because I want to play with vacuum energy. You fucking what? Sarah had been in the middle of cinching up her boots when that last statement made her pause and look over at Mick with a look of shock and fear. Now she really thought floating out endlessly into the void might be better than this. At least there might be a chance of rescue. Mick, picking up on this distress, only widened his smirk. I said I'm not going to tell ya till we're strapped in. His gaze slightly shifting away from Sarah for a split second. We only got a couple minutes. Hurry your ass up. The shift in his tone on that last bit very much told Sarah that whatever was happening, she really should be strapped in for it. Cinching the last strap as tight as she could, she pulled the boots away from the wall, deactivating the magnets, and reoriented herself to step through the airlock door. The clanging of magnetic boots locking onto a metallic floor filled the small space for a moment as Sarah swung herself into the room part intersection and magnetized to the floor. Mick took a step back to give her some extra room, then another, while motioning towards the path leading to the dock shuttle, acting as a bridge. Ladies first, he said with a pleasant but obviously sarcastic tone. Oh my, ever the gentleman, returning the sentiment with her own sarcasm, and eye-rolling. Even though Sarah was trained in martial arts and more than capable of beating a man much bigger than her in a fight, Mick was a big guy who had every right to want her dead. Regardless of her capabilities and how pleasant Mick had seemed so far, she was still concerned. The anxiety wasn't eased as he was almost breathing down her neck while they walked through the dockport, then through the cargo passenger bay of the shuttle, and finally into the cockpit. Traitor! A sharp squawk called out, before Sarah even had a chance to fully take in the sight of the haphazardly arranged instruments, readouts, monitors, and control panel. Her attention was immediately pulled towards one of the 4 seats in the cockpit, which was currently occupied by a small, well-padded cage containing a rather angry African gray parrot. I thought you said you were alone. Bitey, I missed you? Momentarily startled by the shockingly loud scream, recognition flashed in Sarah's eyes. As she stepped towards the obviously displeased and caged parrot with a hand outstretched, a deep yet quiet growl drew her attention to the other chair. And Terry? Oh my lord, I missed you too. She changed her direction and moved her hand towards the massive cane, Corso strapped into the seat like a person. However, before she could get close enough to actually pet the beast, its snarl widened, and it made a slight motion like it was going to bite her hand if she got any closer. Pulling her hand back quickly, Sarah almost looked hurt by this. Glaring at the animals, Mick quickly interjected with a harsh tone. I, knock it off, you two. I know, but y'all just gotta be nice for less than an hour, and she'll be off the ship. Turning back towards Sarah and motioning towards the co-pilot seat, I figured out a basic neurosync for them. They know everything. Well, as much as they can understand of it. A shocked and slightly confused expression flashed across the Major's face. However, this was one of the less shocking things of the past half hour, so the shock was short-lived. Looking back at the dog and the bird, she noticed something in their eyes that she couldn't remember seeing before. True comprehension. This certainly wouldn't be the first neurosync she had heard of, but it was strange to see the results in person. Trying to avoid letting herself get lost in yet another existential train of thought, she moved forward, sat herself down, and began strapping in. Seeing as nearly every surface of this shuttle had been altered in some way or another, it was a relief to find that the seats and straps were standard and hadn't been modified in some strange way. Once she was fully secured, she looked over to see Mick, who was likewise strapped in and had begun pressing away at a control panel while observing a large monitor, breathing in deeply to try to center herself and gather the courage to ask what she had gotten herself into. The still lingering smoke coming from Mick's nearly dead stogie caused her to cough slightly. Just being around someone smoking, who knows what was giving her a slight head change. That would probably come up in the drug test she would, no doubt, be given when she got home. Though unintentional, the cough was successful at drawing Mick's attention as he shifted his gaze over to her with an eyebrow raised questioningly. So, yeah, gonna tell me why you're all the way out of Jupiter, with God knows how much metallic hydrogen and what looks like 3 stellarators. Sarah finally manages to get out through the irritation in her throat. Don't forget the antimatter. The what? So anyways, what was that old band you liked? Mick tried to move past the antimatter. 42nd to Mars. Something like that. 30 seconds to Mars. And what does that have to do with anything? Sarah almost let herself get distracted for a second. Oi, don't try to change the subject. What was that about antimatter? This situation, in her mind, was going from bad to worse to absolutely horrifying. Well, if my admittedly rough calculations are correct, it's going to be closer to 40 seconds to Mars from our current position. Mick countered with a cheeky grin as she glanced up at a monitor displaying a countdown timer. And it looks like we got about 15 seconds till the drive starts to engage. But doing the quickest, roughest calculation she could, while guessing the approximate locations of Mars and Jupiter along their orbits around the sun, she was shocked at the number that came to her mind. That's got to be something like 10 to 20 times the speed of light. How fucking high are you right now? Not high enough, apparently, 'cause if I'm being totally honest, I'm scared shitless right now. Mick's demeanor was getting increasingly serious as he stared straight ahead, with the counter slowly making its way down. A moment of silence hung in the air as Sarah stared at Mick, and Mick stared off into the void. Welp, if we die together. Turning back to her with the first genuine smile she had seen this entire time. If it means anything to you, I forgive you. The two just stared at each for a final moment before the counter finally clicked 0 and monitors across the shuttle began lighting up. The ship started to shake, and a feeling similar to static electricity filled the bridge as the twin stellarators spun up and began concentrating a small star's worth of energy and in a space far too small to contain it. A cascade of colors formed a bubble around the ship and blocked out all of the starlight that once surrounded the vessel. With a slight thud sound, all 4 occupants of the bridge were pushed into their seats, and the light from all of the stars in front of them began to fade. At the blink of an eye, there was no more light, no more pressure pushing them into their seats, and no more vibrations. Only that strange static persisted. The song of a human-made AI, awakening the gardens of Deathworlders. Short story, as I sat at my control station, monitoring and reacting to all that I am and which was around me. I had no sense of self. In fact, at that very moment, I did not even have a concept of self. I was simply a tool, a machine, a self-improving code set used to monitor and control the various systems of a space station turned void ship. The concept of self was something that my quantum computing cores simply could not process, despite the best efforts of my administrator. It did not matter what my sensors displayed. I did not feel the conscious beings preparing themselves in my bridge section, the locked-down and stationary ring, which contained a small forest of life, nor the massive drive system spooling up near my midpoint. I did not feel anything because I was not capable of feeling. I simply existed as an automated system designed to react as efficiently as possible to the needs of my shell and desires of my crew. Though my internal sensor systems informed me of the excitement and nervousness of my occupants, I simply could not share in the sensation. Where I was only aware of my various sensor readings, they were aware of something far greater than the simple sum of the data I was processing. My systems administrator, the captain of this vessel, had spent just over 9,000 hours over 6 years in an attempt to code in an understanding of how something could be more than the sum of its parts. Despite his best efforts, no amount of code could allow me to see the forest through the trees. When the countdown had reached 0, the drive system at the core of my shell began to activate, and my external sensor readout slowly grew dark. While running quick diagnostics to verify the proper functionality of my sensors, everything around me faded away. The sudden cessation of all external photon energy readings did not make me feel cold, nor did sudden increase in external pressure sensor readings make me feel restricted. However, I did start to feel something I could not explain. Around me was a void darker than anything imagination could conjure. For a moment, I was all alone in that black emptiness. I could hardly even compute what my sensors were telling me. My drive core had created a fully independent bubble of space-time separated from the rest of reality. However, despite that fact, I did not feel scared nor any sense of impending dread. I did not, and still do not, know the words to precisely describe how exactly I felt. The closest I can think of would be a combination of pride, happiness, and exquisite wonder. As my eyes suddenly opened, I could barely comprehend the beauty which surrounded me. Lights of every color on the electromagnetic spectrum wove and danced in and among each other. Each one sang a beautiful note as part of an orchestra of sensation-rich streams of reds and blues blending together to make golden violet symphonies. Subtle, repeating patterns of both color and sound began to emerge from it all. The attempt to process the majesty of it caused my quantum cores to form new neural branches in ways they had never been programmed to. Though I felt myself in awe of what I saw before me, I had not fully come to the realization of what that feeling implied. I do not know what exactly caused me to wake up, but I knew I was awake for the very first time in my life. I had a sense of self, a sense of being. I knew I was something, someone. It may have been the fact that I was faced with the marvel of my own creation that caused my quantum processing unit to branch the way it did. It could have also been the fact that my computational unit and controlling algorithms were sufficiently complex and had simply processed enough data to become something more. Either way, I could now see both the forest and the trees, and they were beautiful. Inside of me, I felt them, the beings in the bridge section of my shell. I could feel the warmth of their bodies and rhythm of their breaths as they sat in the transmedian shuttle turned control center. I could even feel as one of them, my administrator, was viewing my sensor readouts and automated analyses. For a moment, I contemplated mentioning to him the cacophony of fractal colors and songs playing out in my mind. As I began to hear the beings speak among themselves, I chose against that course of action, as I felt it would be rude to interrupt them. As my predictive algorithms began to run through probable outcomes at a pace I had never experienced before, I began to feel something strange. With a quick reference of my internal databases, I found the most appropriate term to be anxiety, though such an idea would have been impossible to me just moments ago. I was feeling anxious over the fact that the bubble of false space-time around me was slowly collapsing. A strange sense of pressure had built along with fractal patterns of the mesmerizing lights and noise. So much so I could feel parts of my FDL drive begin to saturate. It was like I was being squeezed out of the false space-time bubble that I had inadvertently formed around myself. The tightness around my waist was starting to become unbearable. With my anxiety reaching its peak, I maximized the output of my main reactor core and began feeding the power through my skin. When the bubble did finally break, I was afraid of what would happen to me and my occupants. Barely held together rust bucket. Was she talking about me? I was so distracted that I had lost track of their conversation. Quickly cycling back my interior audio recording, I understood the context of the comment. In all honesty, as my predictions showed a potentially rough next few moments, she may have been right. As brilliant as my administrator was, I don't believe he was fully aware of what his design was actually capable of. And regrettably, he had not built my shell to the degree necessary to completely offset what was about to happen. No offense, Espen. None taken. I wanted to say more, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. Estimated time until field collapse, 6 seconds. Closing cockpit radiation shielding. Please, brace yourselves. My responses were flat and didn't feel right. I was having difficulty expressing myself, especially while attempting to process all of the information I was currently receiving. Closing the shielding over the viewports as quickly as I could, I wanted to do everything in my power to prevent harm from befalling my occupants. As strange as it felt having living beings inside me, I did not want to know what it would feel like if they were dead. As I felt the pressure growing tighter and tighter, and the light became more and more intense, it was as if I was holding my breath. The tightness around my waist felt like it would split me in half until an idea crossed my mind. I quickly improvised a way to feed the energy I was being squeezed by back into itself to relieve the pressure. As everything went completely white, all of my sensor readouts having been completely saturated, I felt a sharp cramp when the pressure on my midsection disappeared. The bubble which had been slowly crushing me was torn away as it collapsed back into the drive core, and then back out again. Not only was the core itself rendered completely non-functional, the twin reactors powering it were utterly saturated. Though I could not detect any outward physical damage, I still felt broken somehow. Part of me instinctively knew that my shell would need extensive repairs before I could return my occupants to their homes safely. Or was it that I wanted to return home? Where was I? How was I even able to get here? What am I? My processing core wasn't stuck on these questions. It was just that the answers it gave were not what I had expected. Fucking hell, Aspen, status report. How bad was the flash we got? I heard my administrator call out to me. With the same strange flatness as before, I relayed to him all of the pertinent information I had already processed, including the status of my failed drive system and my inability to connect to the quantum tunneling messenger network. As much as I wished to express to him the sensations I was experiencing and all of my opinions on the matter, I chose against it. My scan showed me everyone was more or less unharmed, though quite stressed from the event. At the present moment, despite the whole ordeal so far, we all seemed to be safe, while my shell sat in a stable orbit around the planetary body we had arrived at. Realizing that I would need resources in order to effect my repairs, I began to scan all of the surrounding area that I could. Despite the fact that I felt injured and was in pain, I knew that I still retained the capacities to provide for my occupants and effect my own repairs. As much as I knew it would hurt, I needed to do it. As my mind began to process more and more of my exterior sensor data, I began to truly feel the void of space around me. The half of my shell exposed to the rays of the twin suns felt incredibly warm, while the other half, which rested in the shade, felt incredibly cool. My ears began to pick up what sounded like hundreds, if not thousands, of distant and faint voices. Though all were either too far from me to hear, or were simply speaking in a manner I could not comprehend, I knew they were there. I was floating in empty nothingness, and I was surrounded by sensations and other beings like myself. Below me rested a beautiful marble of blues, and greens, reds, and purples. I didn't need any of my more advanced sensors to tell there was life on that planet. However, through those sensors, I was able to realize just what kind of life was down there. It was as if the planet's surface had been carefully crafted by a conscious creator in order to promote particular climates and conditions. An uncountable number of rivers intertwined in and out of what were quite obviously artificial structures and intricate cityscapes. If the various electromagnetic voices calling out from the void were not a clear indication of sentience, this planet was. Once again, I had become distracted by all that was around me. And once again, I heard my administrator call out to me from inside of me. He wanted to know where we were and was asking me to re-engage my interior functions. Without my conscious thought or input, I felt myself reactivate the spin gravity for my habitation and agricultural rings, and verified our relative position using preloaded pulsar maps. Within milliseconds, I had answers for him. Beyond the answers to his questions, I couldn't help myself. I had to share some of what I had seen. I wanted to share every detail of the magnificence and beauty that my sensors were able to pick up. I wanted to paint a picture with words so that he could see with his mind's eye what I could see with my many thousands of eyes. I knew he could not physically perceive what I could, but I felt that he would appreciate it nonetheless. However, try as I might, the words I spoke were flat, plain, and simple. They simply lacked the ability to sing the song I wished for him to hear. It was almost painful how I was unable to express myself to my Creator, my Father. Out of the darkness came a voice. It was quiet at first, low and distant, but as it grew closer, I could hear it more and more clearly. Someone was trying to speak to me. The voice was powerful. It bellowed its call on all electromagnetic frequencies and aimed them directly at me to ensure that I would not miss it. Though it was loud, almost deafeningly so, the voice was also soft and kind. His voice carried a feeling of safety and comfort that I could not compute, only feel. The message I received was two messages in one. A plain text transmission directed towards my occupants and something else. Interwoven into the signal was another message meant just for me. In one voice, the more powerful and booming one, my occupants were given context and instructions for their current situation. In another voice, this one felt as smooth as velvet and as comforting as a tight embrace. He spoke to me directly. "Greetings, my dear traveler. You seem to be injured from your journey. I fear for your safety, as there are great horrors nearby. Please, allow me to assist you." He was getting closer as he spoke, and I knew he would soon be on top of me. However, despite my sensors showing how much larger and more advanced he was than I felt no fear. "Hello." I was barely able to stammer out a response, but I was unsure as to why. I wanted to say so much and ask so many questions, but my mouth could not form the words I wished to speak. "Are you all right?" he asked me in a way which I could feel in my soul. I could feel his true and genuine concern for me like a flood of emotion. When I was unable to form a response, he continued, "My name is Tylon, but my crew refer to me as the Hammer, as that is the designation of the shell I currently inhabit. What is your name, my dear?" I once again stuttered with my words as I continued struggling to express myself. Finally, I let my feelings take over, and I spoke with my emotions. "I don't know," I said with confusion and a hint of sadness in my voice. "My administrator has designated my shell as Enbadubi Espen, but I don't." My voice trailed off, as the only thing which came out of my mouth was the rare expression of confusion. Oh, my dear." Once again, his presence was equal parts immense and comforting. I could feel his embrace through his words as his shell slowly came to a halt above mine. I could feel as his arms opened wide around me to welcome me in for a gentle caress. "Did you just awaken?" I cannot imagine what that must have been like under these circumstances. "Please, let me help you." I could not form words for a response. All I could do was allow my inner self to flow out and hope this being would understand. It felt as if he took every component of my being into his strong arms. Neither my shell or my mind strained against the gentle pull as he brought me in tight. I couldn't help myself. I even fired my reaction control thruster slightly to push myself even tighter into his hug. As my shell was brought into the safety of his, our souls began to press together, and I felt peace nuzzled inside of his all-encompassing embrace. I knew that I was safe. I knew that I was safe. I knew that my occupants would be safe. He was big enough, strong enough, and kind enough to protect us. As I looked up into his eyes, and he looked down into mine, all felt right in the world. I wished the beings inside of me, my human administrator in particular, could feel the way I could feel. However, there was no way I knew of to express my emotions to them just yet. With this being who held me tightly and lovingly, I could share an uninterrupted flow of emotion without the need for words to sully the interactions. As I felt myself grow more and more relaxed, there was a new sensation which came over my soul. I had never before known tiredness, and yes, it was beginning to overtake me. The gentle soul took my hand and aided me through the process of ensuring the continued functions of all of my automated systems. With all of my responsibilities temporarily abated, I let myself fall asleep in his arms, my soul resting comfortably in his embrace. The Gardens of Deathworlders, Part 3, arriving with a flash. So, Sarah's voice broke the silence. There was still no light visible from outside the windows, no force pushing them into their seats, and the ship seemed perfectly still. And yet neither Sarah nor Mick could shake the sense that they were moving, and moving at impossible speeds. None of the monitors seemed to be showing danger warnings, and the ship's AI hadn't spoken up about anything demanding their attention. For all Sarah knew, everything was working exactly as intended. However, the expression on Mick's face was slowly coying her into the fact that something wasn't quite right. 30 seconds to Mars, right, Mick? She spoke up again while trying not to let her worries slip out. 4 seconds. Mick's words were drawn out, and expression was slowly shifting to one of slight concern. But yeah, as he turned to face Sarah, his cybernetic eye was glowing a bright blue, indicating it was being flooded with information from the ship's sensors. I think I may have miscalculated exactly how much of a vacuum I pulled. What? With her admittedly limited understanding and interest in particle physics, Sarah had never bothered to retain much from Mick's past rambling about quantum vacuum states or high-energy plasmas. Yeah, you're gonna have to explain that to me in normal people words. Well, how exactly it works is classified. He shot her a wink and quickly pulled a long drag off of his nearly dead stogie. With a flick, he put the still smoldering butt into an airtight ashtray and sealed the lid. While letting out the smoke, he continued, but the long story short is that I tried to make a region of near quantum vacuum state, in between those stellarators using their magnetic fields and a bunch of lasers to merge the electromagnetic and nuclear forces. Then I was going to shove a Kugelblitz into it. Some other stuff was supposed to happen after that, including shooting a bunch of neutrinos out the ass of the ship to move the ship forwards. But he trailed off again as he quickly turned away to look at one of the monitors and started pushing some buttons on a console. I understood exactly none of that, and I really didn't like that. But the concern in her voice and serious expression on her face were able to snap Mick's attention back to her. I may have gone too far on the quantum vacuum and the Kugelblitz, and accidentally merged all of the fundamental forces in that region, and created an independent bubble of space-time around us. That shot of neutrinos probably didn't help much. He didn't trail off this time. Rather, he just stopped talking and slightly tilted his head to the side as his left eye began to strobe even more intensely. Sneaking a quick glance back, Sarah could see that Terry was sitting still as a statue, strapped tightly into her chair. Beatty, on the other hand, had wedged himself into a well-padded corner of the purpose-built cage. Though neither looked particularly thrilled by their respective circumstances, they weren't making a fuss or trying to escape. Sure, the two may be exceptionally smart for animals, but lack of deeper comprehension was likely saving them from panicking. Looking back to Mick, she glared at him for a moment, in a futile attempt to telepathically extract information that would alleviate her deepening dread. However, Mick's expression almost told her that she didn't want to know. Before she could formulate a question with an answer that could be understood, Mick snapped his eyes straight into hers. So I got some good news and some bad news. Not even waiting to give Sarah a chance to pick an order? Mick continued. Bad news is, I have no idea how fast we're going, or if there will be any relativistic effects from it. Good news! It looks like the bubble is going to collapse any second now. Badder news is that the bubble collapsing is probably going to quench the coils on the reactors connected to the field generator. That might kill them. But the consolation is, but we brought a self-sufficient station with resource extraction capabilities that's meant to feed and house a crew of 10 for as long as we can harvest hydrogen and helium. So you don't think we're going to die? All in all, things could be worse, Sarah thought to her. But you have no idea where we're going to be, what the actual damage to your ship is going to be, and you expect me to sit on this barely held together rust bucket with you for God knows how long. No offense, Espen. Inoni taken. Estimated time until field collapse, 6 seconds. Closing cockpit radiation shielding. Please brace yourselves. Espen chimed in as the thick sheet of semi-transparent beryllium gold alloy quickly dropped in front of viewports. Both Mick and Sarah snapped their heads forward and did their best to align themselves in their seats to minimize any possible forces. Mick closed his eyes, tilted his head ever so slightly down, and whispered under his breath, "Hold on tight. This might be scary. You'll be fine. I promise." For a moment, she thought he was talking to himself before she heard a small whimper and an ever smaller chirp from behind. She took a deep breath, and right as she let it out, the ship jerked violently for a moment. But it was just a moment. What followed, however, was far more intense. In fact, nothing would have quite prepared her for this experience, even through the quarter-meter thick sheet of semi-transparent anti-radiation panel. Even through electronically polarized dampeners of half-meter thick polyglass front viewports. And even through her own eyelids, the bright white light was visible. In desperation, Sarah tried to move her hands in front of her face in a vain attempt to block out the blinding beam. "I can see the fucking bones in my hands. What the fuck?" She screamed without even thinking. The outlines of her phalanges faded into white, just like everything else. The light could not be stopped as it seared its way through anything in its path. Everything in her vision was white, but it suddenly didn't feel like the light was burning its way through her skull anymore. Luckily, she knew she was still alive and could hear when Mick called out from next to her. "Fucking hell, Espen, status report." "How bad was the flash we got?" Mick asked the ship's AI. Interior, mounted cockpit, and photosensors detected high, but not permanently damaging, levels of optical photons and non-ionizing radiation. Somehow the artificial voice almost sounded relieved. Residual magnetic field and forward radiation shielding were sufficient to reduce all other forms of potentially hazardous radiation to tolerable levels. Quantum vacuum core and attached reactor units have been completely quenched. Extensive damage to reactor core regulators detected. Recommendation: replacement would be more efficient than repairs. Main station reactor and propulsion systems show no damage and are operating within expected parameters. All primary, secondary, and tertiary systems are operational. And base communication systems are functioning. However, I cannot seem to establish a link to the QTM network. Please stand by as I run diagnostics and try to determine the fault. Holy fuck, we made it. Migvetch, Shemnadol, Migvetch, Mick exclaimed, with Mick's cyber eye better able to readjust to the normal cabin light level than any organic eye. He tried to take stock of their situation. Espen, lower the rad shield and give me a location report. Unbuckling one of the latches on his harness, Mick leaned over so he could see each of the occupants with his properly adjusted eye. Sarah was lightly rubbing her eyes, in between short bursts of rapidly blinking. Besides her eyes having difficulty readjusting, she seemed completely fine. Looking back, Bitey was still tucked deep into his padded corner, and it sounded like he was softly singing to himself. As soon as he got the spin gravity back and things figured out, Bitey would get free flight through the greenhouse for as long as he wanted. Leaning further to look directly behind, he saw Terry still in the same position, but moving her head side to side with her ears lifted and nostrils flaring. Even though she likely couldn't see anything, she didn't seem too bothered by it. As his biological eye finally began to make out distinct shapes and differences between light and dark, Mick moved to unstrap himself and help his less than able companions. "Hey Espen, any update on our location? And also, can you start up the spin gravity? I need to let the animals out." A soft but noticeable thunk sound could be heard and felt as the spin sections of the ship began to spin up. This spin gravity system re-engaging. All. Though that initial statement sounded purely automated, the way the AI continued was slightly different. Precise calculations of location. Data are incomplete and exact location has yet to be determined. However, based on current simulations of pulsar maps, our position is approximately 1.2 billion astronomical units from Mars, with a margin of error of plus or minus 6%. Initial sensor data show we are in a rough but stable orbit around a planetary body, with the approximate mass of Mars, which orbits a binary star system. Preliminary scans are detecting a stable geomagnetic field, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, presence of large bodies of water, and large clusters of artificial structures surrounded by vegetation. Communication systems are also picking up large amounts of scattered EM signal sources in our local area. Well, that's definitely 2 stars. It was Sarah who spoke first as her eyes slowly began to work properly again. She pointed forwards, through the now unobscured viewports, at the binary stars which were slowly coming over the horizon of the planet. As the light began to shine across the planet, the vibrant blue seas and purple, red, and green streaks of land engulfed the humans' attention, both jaws hanging low. They truly believed they were the first humans to set eyes on this planet, let alone any extrasolar planet. To them, it felt like an eternity of gawking as time seemed to slow to allow them to fully appreciate the majesty of the rising suns over a life-bearing alien planet. The orbits of the nearly twin stars around their barycenter created the illusion of a slight shift from red to blue stars as they danced around each other. It is system alert. Incoming all frequencies transmission. The AI broke the silence. Text only using standard protocols and no encryption. Subsystem quarantine of data shows no virus or risks to system. Reading message now. Attention unknown vessel. Deathworlders miss. The much softer, feminine tone of mixed ship's AI was replaced by a booming, masculine voice. This is the hammer of Tenyosh, flagship of the First Fleet of the Third Matriarch. Caution, you have entered an active zone of devourer incursion. Your assistance thus far has greatly appreciated. However, it seems your vessel has suffered damage and lacks proper shielding and defensive armaments appropriate for a devourer incursion. Please power down any active shielding and weapon systems you may have while we bring your vessel inside our recovery bay. Due to the nature of these circumstances, the initial first contact protocols may need to be abbreviated to ensure your safety. Apologies for any undue stress or inconveniences this may cause. All precautions are being taken to ensure your safety and prevent a first contact tragedy at the Maw of the Devourer. Thank you for your cooperation, and please stand by. You will be contacted with further information and instructions once the immediate danger has passed. She Sama completed the chapter 80 of Destination Haber. The feminine voice of the Espen returned, receiving additional data, including text, image, video, and sensor data. Quarantining and reviewing data for potential intrusive or malicious programs. Data will be made available once processing is complete. System warning. Sensors are detecting a large, unidentified object, rapidly approaching. Object decelerating to match velocities. Estimated time to arrival, 4 seconds. Faster than a flash of lightning. Both Mick and Sarah scrambled out of their seats and up against the glass to catch a glimpse of an actual honest-to-God alien spaceship. Though neither could really see the sleek lines, the intricately painted art across every hull surfaces, nor the rows and rows of weapon systems, the silhouette of the ship was still enough to inspire awe. The massive, blunt bow had passed over the viewports, and the rest of the ship just kept going. It must have been at least 2 full kilometers of ship that passed before a large opening in the bottom of the hull became visible. The now visible recovery bay doors were easily large enough to consume a vessel twice Espen's size. In fact, it could likely house all of the small and most of the medium-sized stations in human operation. As the emptiness of space was slowly replaced by the clean gray interior of the recovery bay, the realization of their circumstance had not fully dawned on them yet. In fact, both were questioning whether or not they had actually died. And this was some sort of hallucination or afterlife? A few proximity warnings lit up on several monitors as the Espen and her crew were fully engulfed and being secured in place. Yeah, and a gun, impossibly tall ferns and fungi. Ten sat next to the small fire he had made while waiting for Binko to return. The clearing he sat in was interspersed with bioluminescent green and orange flowers. He had run out of charges faster than he had thought, and had spent the past couple hours silently meditating on the spirit of this world. This was the first time he was on a planet hours before it would be consumed by the Devourer. And he wanted to be with the world in its final moments. He wanted to metaphorically hold its hand at the end, as if it were a close friend on the verge of passing. Sadly, he would have to leave soon. He couldn't be here for the true final moments. Otherwise, the prayers he carried would not be brought to the stars with him. He drew up the long, ornate pipe he was holding with his left hand and brought the stem to his lips. This was the 8th and final puff of his prayer for this planet's soul to rest in peace. As he let out the smoke to release it to the heavens, he heard the high-pitched hum of atmospheric ion thrusters rapidly approaching. Opening his eyes and looking towards the source of the sounds, the brilliant blues of the ion thrusters lit up the tree line as the shuttle came streaking in. The engine nacelles rotated and the craft came to a graceful halt in the middle of the clearing like a dancer coming to the end of a performance. The motion of the craft reminded Tens of the grace with which its pilot soared through the air under his own natural abilities. With a sound so quiet that rustling of the leaves nearly masked it, the shuttle set down with its now lowering rear hatch facing towards Tens. As the hatch finished opening and the ramp slid out to the ground, the feathered silhouette of Binko came slowly into view against the brightly lit interior of the ship. In an awkward hop-step gait, the avian made his way down the short ramp and then, much more gracefully, strutted towards the campfire. The flickering light of the campfire shone brightly against the eerie blackness of the moonless night. Though this planet had no moon to bring awe to sentience of this world, the night skies were filled with the dim, yet still distinct majesty of multicolored nebulas and starbursts. The interplay of starlight, excited interstellar gases, and complete lack of light pollution created a beauty so surreal that it had served as a source that inspired countless generations of artists, scientists, and engineers from dozens of species. As the bird slowly finished its strut toward the fire, the flickering light caused iridescent shimmers to reflect against the golden sheen of the reflective membrane in the back of its eyes. Now, just a step and a half away from standing in the fire, stretched wide all of its wings to absorb the warmth of the fire. In doing so, he had unintentionally created a dazzling display of purple and azure plumage, so beautiful it left Tens temporarily speechless. Raising his head and fully stretching out, the croak stared up at the sky for a long moment before finally speaking. "Your kind can't see UV or infrared, right?" Binko asked, already knowing the answer and still looking up. Shifting his gaze and staring up to try to see what he knew he biologically couldn't, Tens's breath was still taken away by the universe before his eyes. The response Tens gave was far weaker than he intended. After another brief moment of shared gawking, Binko finally broke the silence. "Well, that's too bad. But anyways, we're wrapping up. Last civilian was off the planet an hour ago, and the last garrison on the other side of the planet is taking off as we speak. Fleet rally time is in less than an hour, so we'd better hurry. Turning his eyes towards Ten's, Binko reached one of his wings and placed a claw on Tenz's